We can't hear you. I don't know if your microphone's off or. No, I just, adjusted the volume.
How's that?
All right, so everybody, this is Lance Collister. Lance, this is everybody. Lance is here to talk to us about Moonbounce, EME. He's been doing this over 50 years, and hopefully he'll start with the story of how he was the very first ham to talk to an astronaut, right?
I've got it in there.
Better?
Oh, that one.
Maybe stronger.
That's good. That's better.
There we go. All right, so the floor is yours, Lance. Take it away.
Okay, well, hello, Antelope Valley. This is W7GJ up in the boonies in Frenchtown, Montana. And this is an interesting test for me because this is the first Zoom presentation that I've done since we got high-speed internet here out in the middle of nowhere. So it'll be an interesting test. So let me just start out by saying that Bud asked me to do an introductory program on what is Moonbounce all about. And I have to say that my experience with Moonbounce is pretty limited to just the VHF bands. And now there's quite a bit of activity on the UHF bands. But I'll show you what I've got and discuss it a little bit, and we'll open it up for discussions at the end. So can you see my screen? Yes. Let me try to... Okay. This is a presentation that I put together for some people who are not hams, so I'll try to quickly speed by the stuff that all of you experienced amateur radio operators already know. But the big thing is, why in the world would anybody be interested in trying to do this? And, you know, living where I do in Montana, I got interested in, I actually got interested in 2-meter EME before I moved to Montana. But when I got interested in 6 meters, I decided, well, it worked on 2 meters. So even though I'm way out of the propagation up here for 6 meters, I'll just do the same thing on 2 meters that I did on 6 meters. And so I've been, since 1996, when I got on 6 meters, I've been trying to popularize 6-meter EME around the world so that I could work people. And it's gotten me like 230 some countries so far on 6 meters.
Wow. All on Moonbounce?
Not all on Moonbounce. I think like 170 are on Moonbounce.
Wow. Wow.
So let's try to keep it simple. I'll go over some basic physics and explain what amateur radio is and the role the ionosphere plays with us, and talk a little bit about Moonbounce and how my journey has been on Moonbounce. Everybody knows that radio waves are electromagnetic waves, just like visible light, and they all travel at the speed of light. The higher frequencies have more energy. So the higher frequencies behave differently. And we all know about the different layers of the ionosphere and ionospheric propagation on HF. And you all know that some of us collect countries. So even on VHF, we still collect countries. So HF signals are easy to skip around the world. Um, and they can even double hop, and we all know about that. Um, it's a little bit tougher when you get higher in frequency because as you go up in frequency, the signals become more local in nature, or they just go right up through the ionosphere into space. Uh, the higher the frequency, the more readily they just go right up on through the ionosphere into space. That makes the higher frequencies pretty well suited to EME. Probably the worst band for EME is the lower VHF frequencies, especially 6 meters. And the reason for that is because there's so much ionospheric stuff that can go wrong with the signals. And that just gives you an idea of what's going on here, what we're talking about. Okay, and these are the local VHF bands. And it just shows basically where a couple of the ham bands fit into the spectrum here. So on VHF, you know, I've always been on VHF, primarily on VHF, and it's always just enthralled me because you can do so many different things that are unusual rather than talk around locally. You can, if you live in the right area, you guys down there are probably just like me. I mean, we don't have temperature inversions up here because we don't have any humidity, but you can talk long distances. When I was back in living in Cleveland, Ohio, I couldn't believe working out into the Midwest on 2 meters. It was pretty much fun. You can bounce your signals off ionized meteor trails, which was something that I did a lot when I was in high school and college. You bounce your signals off the northern lights, not so much down where you live, but when I was in Vermont, I mean, it was very frequent to be able to have aurora. And then certainly during the summertime, during E-skip season, it's possible to make some contacts on 2 meters and much more frequent on 6 meters during June and July. Of course, down where you are, you probably have really good long seasons on EME on 6 meters. And then we can use the moon as a reflector to contact stations on the other side of the world. And that's what I've been focusing on here in the last few decades. So we kind of, on VHF, we beam our signal up at the moon in kind of a shotgun style, and some of that hits the moon, and 7% of what hits the moon is reflected back to Earth, and it's very weak. But under the right conditions, you can make a contact. It takes 2.5 seconds for the signals to come back from the moon. That varies a little bit throughout the month as the moon moves in and out from the Earth in its orbit around the Earth. And, you know, so it goes from like 2.5 to 3 seconds or something like that. It's a 2 dB loss difference throughout the course of the month, just in the changing distance to the moon. On 6 meters, it's there are other factors that really also contribute to the optimum times of the month to make contacts. And the big thing on 6 meters is sky noise. As you probably know, the moon moves through different parts of the sky over the course of its orbit, over the course of a month. And some parts of the sky are very noisy. And I liken it to trying to overhear a conversation at a crowded cocktail party from people that are on the other side of the room. And when everybody's talking, you just can't make out anything that's going on. But if everybody's totally quiet, you can just make out what the conversation is on the other side of the room. And that's basically the difference between certain days of the month on 6-meter EME. On the higher frequencies, like 1296, 432, and 1296, there's virtually no sky noise interference. So they don't really care about that. What they care about at those frequencies is just the distance to the moon and picking a time of month when they get 2 dB more gain because of the closeness to the Earth, or if they can't raise their dish up very high, they prefer times of month when the moon is on a northern declination, so it's higher in the sky for us in the northern hemisphere. So EME communication is, it's recent in my lifetime anyway. It used to require special parametric amplifiers, and they were cooled but with liquid nitrogen and so on, and high power transmitters, huge antennas at each end, and computers to calculate the moon's position for each station, which most people, it's hard to believe, but back in the 70s, when I got interested in EME, there were no computers to calculate the moon's position for each station. We just take this stuff for granted, but there were no cell phones. There were no computers. So one of the first things that I did was in 1974, I wrote a computer program to track the moon and print out moon windows between different stations so that people knew where to aim. That was the big problem in the beginning. People didn't know where to point to work somebody else. It's okay if you have moon, but you got to have it on the other side too. So only the government initially had the capability to bounce signals off the moon. And then they did some experimentation, but when they came up with satellites, they found that much more reliable. However, things have changed with the amateur radio situation in the last 50 years, and we can also make contacts by bouncing signals off the moon to people who can also see the moon at the same time as we can. So here's a little timetable. The first radar signals were inadvertently received by the Germans in 1944 on UHF. And in 1946, the U.S. government experimented with EME. And over the next 10 years, they did work on it. The first radio echoes were detected from the moon by amateur radio in 1953. In 1960, the first contact was made on ham radio on 1296. And in 1964, the first amateur radio contact was made on 144 megahertz. And in 1972, the first amateur radio contact was made on 50 megahertz. I told you that 6 meters is a little bit tougher band for EME because of all of the ionospheric interference. The antennas have to be 3 times as big, and the ionosphere can interfere with things.
Hey, Lance,
Yes,
what mode was that for the first contact on 50 megahertz?
it was CW.
Okay.
That's the only real way we had of making contacts, weak signal contacts, until about 22, 23 years ago. So everything was on CW. And, in the 1990s, computer programs were advanced enough so that I could have a display on my computer screen of the audio coming from my receiver. And it was so frustrating to see these traces on the computer screen that I couldn't hear.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, I can see he's there. Well, I just have to wait until it gets brighter on the computer screen, I guess, till I can hear him in my headphones. And I thought, if I can see him on the computer, there's got to be some way to do something about this. And it took a Nobel Prize winner, K1JT, Joe Taylor, to get interested in Moonbounce again after his work in radio astronomy. And he said, we've learned a lot in signal processing in radio astronomy. I'll bet we could do a lot for Moonbounce. And he wrote a program called WSJT, which is Weak Signals by JT. And that package of weak signal programs is now used all around the world for Moonbounce because it's over 10 times more sensitive than CW. So what we do is we hook our computers up to the radio, so it transmits single sideband on the radio, but it's using tones that are generated by the computer. And then the computer is also used to decode those signals when it hears them. And it does just an amazing job, and it's opened up tremendous possibilities.
What are you doing?
I'll give you some examples here in a minute. This was my first introduction to VHF. You can see I have a Heathkit tour there. I don't know if some of you might be old enough to remember the Heathkit sixer and tour, but that was on 2 meters, and I was pretty nervous. That was my first QSO. It was pretty exciting to work all the way across town, though. And then I got pretty interested in trying to work across the county and so on. It took me a little over 10 years to hear my first EME signals that were on 2 meters. And then, as I said, in 1974, I wrote the first EME computer program so people could tell where to point their antennas to work other people. In 1978, I made my first 2-meter EME contact. And then in 82, I did my first of 6 EME de-expeditions on 2 meters. I went to the Bahamas 4 times and the Cayman Islands twice. And then I almost killed myself in a hiking accident in 1995. And so I thought, well, if I'm ever going to get on 6 meters, I guess I better do it now before I kill myself again. So I built a 7-element Yagi and built an 8877 amplifier while I was still on crutches. And I ran schedules with an 8 Yagi station in Sweden for several months and on CW, and I finally worked him thanks to his patience. Every time we had a common window, there was aurora going on, so that completely made it impossible for us to make contact, but finally we did. And then after I survived a cancer scare where they said I only had 2 months to live, I decided to give back to the 6-meter community and go on 6-meter EME de-expeditions and activate rare countries. And I made the first one in 2009. I just made the 20th one last month. So here's the computer program that I wrote. Is called GJ Tracker, and it's still used by people all around the world today. I use it. It's really simple, and it doesn't use any computing power at all, at least not by today's standards. You just put in the calls at the stations you're interested in and press the button to look up their locators, and it inputs all their latitude and longitude, and you just select the dates that you want to have and tell them, what the parameters are for elevation that they can do, and it prints out on the screen for as many days as you want. You can adjust the printout intervals and so on. And it's free on my webpage. This was my first, my first Moonbounce array was 4 of these Yagis and in Vermont when I lived in Vermont. And I upgraded that to 8 Yagis before I left Vermont. And my first of 4, this was my first of 4 2-meter de-expeditions to Abaco Island in the Bahamas, where I set up a 4 Yagi array on the beach. You can see my dad is down here giving me advice. And then Bud asked me to mention something about the W5LFL contact. My 15 minutes of fame was I was the first ham in the world to have a 2-way conversation with W5LFL in the space shuttle on STS-9, and that was in 1983. And I had 12 Yagis on 2 meters at the time. And he was transmitting with 5 watts on FM. So I figured that he would probably hear me before I hear him. The best I could do up at the frequency he was listening on was I tuned it up and detuned the amplifier as far as it would go, backing the capacitor plate back up against the chassis, and I got 1,000 watts output up on 145 or something where he said he'd be listening.
Lance, that was obviously prearranged or something with you and the astronaut?
No, that's another story too. I thought it would be interesting to see if I could work him, but I didn't know when he was going to be on. I got on 75 meters and I asked some people on the Montana net if they knew anything about it, and somebody in Butte, Montana said, "Oh yeah, well, he's going to be making a pass that is pretty close to your part of the country around 7:30 tonight." But he hadn't been on the air since the shuttle went up. So I said, "Oh, I'll listen." So I went up and watched the news and came down, and I thought, well, I might as well start calling him at about 25 after 7, because I wasn't sure. I had no aiming information or anything. I just kind of pointed to the southwest and started calling him, and he had already announced that he would be listening during odd minutes or even minutes, one or the other, and we're supposed to be calling in the other sequence on 2-meter FM. So I called him for a minute, listened for a minute, called him for a minute. This went on for 5 or 10 minutes, I guess, and then all of a sudden he comes back and he answers me and he said, "We've been hearing you all the way out over the Pacific." And so I guess it worked.
I was just gonna say, with a kilowatt, you're gonna beat anybody else who was trying to get a hold of it.
Well, I asked on 75 meters, I said, how much power should I run? And they said, well, on FM, it's only going to capture the loudest stations, so you better run everything you can. And so I did. I ran a kilowatt, and I copied him. I thought maybe I had a recording of it in here, but I guess I don't. He was full quieting on my FM radio. But I was in the noise for him. Because I heard a recording that he had made, and you know, you can copy me okay, but it doesn't sound like I'm very strong, because the background noise with all the thousands of callers was creating the background noise. But he was great here. Of course, he's only like 150 miles line of sight from me, so he he was a fantastic signal here. And that's Roy Neal, who handed me the QSL card at the Pacific Northwest convention afterward. Roy was a science journalist for CBS, I think. So then this was a 1995 2-meter de-expedition that I did to Little Cayman. Now, here are some of the problems that are typical on EME. When a electromagnetic signal, a radio signal, goes up through the ionosphere in a magnetic field, the polarity, polarization rotates. And that's not such a big problem if you're using circular polarization or something like that. But when you're using, a VHF antenna with linear polarization, it's a huge thing. If the signals come back and they're 90 degrees, you won't hear them at all. That's like another 23 dB of attenuation. And when the signals are barely detectable to start with, that's a huge problem. So they can rotate around and change, and the higher the frequency, the slower the change is, and it depends also on the ionization in the ionosphere. So if there's a big geomagnetic storm or something, they can be totally blocked or rotate quickly, or when the KP index is very, very low, which indicates very, very quiet geomagnetic conditions, the Faraday rotation can slow way down, and the signals can be just stuck in the wrong position for long periods of time, maybe an hour. So there's a whole different way of making a contact on VHF EME than there is on HF, for example. On HF, we're so used to having reciprocal propagation. You just, you don't call a DX station till you can hear them, because you know that they're going to be able to hear you as soon as you call then. On 6 meters, especially, you need to start calling, because if you don't call for a half an hour, before you hear the other station, you may have missed your opportunity for the other station to hear you. So there are lots of really unusual situations in trying to make a contact on VHF EME. So here's an example that a couple th recordings that I made of EME signals on 2 meters in 1985. I hope you can hear these. I don't know. Let's see if it works. I don't think it's working. Okay, well, it worked here before I got onto the group chat, so sorry about that. Anyway, you can hear there's a 2.5 second delay, and the echoes come back. This is a portable 2 meter antenna for EME that German station did. You can see his, this is a cross-polarized Yagi. So it's really the icing on the cake if you're on a de-expedition and you can switch between polarities, then you don't get skunked by frozen up cross-polarization due to Faraday rotation. And this is a 4 Yagi array on 2 meter EME. And this is what a 4 Yagi cross polarization on array on 6 meters looks like. You can see the little people down here for scale. There aren't many people around the world who have cross polarized Yagis on 6 meters, simply because it's just too huge and complicated. Here's a crossed Yagi array that HB9Q built in Switzerland. I don't know if you can see the title to, oh, you probably can. I just have this menu thing across the top that's blocking on my screen. But he really did a very unusual way of arranging this. Of course, all the feed lines are out in back of the array so that they don't get in the field of the antennas and disrupt the pattern. And everything out in front of the array is all fiberglass, so it doesn't affect things. And then he does a pretty strange thing here to elevate the antenna. You know, it's just a very unusual arrangement, but it gives him the ability to always transmit in circular polarization so people can hear him no matter what the Faraday rotation is. And then he has a very complicated electronic switching system that automatically looks at all the different polarization angles and then only feeds the correct polarization that the antenna is receiving to the computer to decode. So normally contacts with him are just really immediate and quick, but he's about the only person in the world like that. This was OH2BC. He had 8 cross-polarized Yagis on 6 meters, and his array was big enough. So they wound up having 2 4 Yagi arrays, having different homes somewhere in Finland now. So one of the things about horizon-only Yagis that are just horizontally polarized, you can take advantage of ground gain. And I don't know how many of you know about ground gain. You know, probably if you're involved with HF antennas and modeling and so on, you probably are familiar with it. But for years, I didn't know anything about it. I was on 2-meter EME, and I just was always pointed up in the air. So I didn't really know anything about ground gain until I got on 6 meters, and I found out that most of the people I had to work on 6-meter EME were just single Yagi stations, and they had no elevation. And so I learned about ground gain. And ground gain is, if you are not familiar with ground gain, you probably have all looked at the sunset or sunrise out over a lake or the ocean, and you see all these bright reflections, all, from the sun and the reflections off the water. And when they all add up, it gets darn bright. And the same thing happens with the moon and radio waves. And at the right elevations, all of those reflections can add up off the ground and add in sync, and the signals can be 6 dB better than free space gain. So it can make a single Yagi act like 4. And when you're in a situation where the signals are just barely perceptible, that is huge. And the best results are when the antenna is aimed out over smooth, undeveloped terrain or something like the ocean. And that's why I love going on these de-expeditions where I can point the antenna out over the ocean on moonrise or moonset or moonset. And I'll tell you, the signals will just roll up your socks, as Don Fall used to say, W7FN. Here's an example of what ground gain looks like. This is a model of my single Yagi at 70 feet for 6 meters. You can see that, at 4 degrees, I've got a nice big main lobe, and then at 11 degrees, I've got another one. And then at 18 degrees, I've got another one. And I made my first 6-meter EME contact with a station in South Africa in 2002. And he said, we've been experimenting with this new WSJT program and weak signals down here, and we found that we can really make some good contacts. And would you like to try EME with me? And I said, well, I've never done EME on 6 meters with the digital stuff before, but I had just built a computer interface so that I could have the rig automatically call CQ on sideband for me. So I said, well, that'll work, and let's give it a try. So we worked on his moonset and my moonrise. I had no elevation at the time. And we made a contact right off. And I thought, well, thank you for a new country. But let's try a schedule next week too, just to make sure that that I'm really seeing what's going on here, that this is not a one-off thing. So the next week, the moon was in my 3rd lobe up here, and we worked again. So I was hooked after that, and 6-meter EME was all on digital from then on for me. Now, I included this slide as kind of an update because my friend KB7Q over in Montana just bought one of these Chinese solar cookers off of Amazon for $100. And this is the hottest thing on 1296 right now, is to buy these 1.4 meter dishes, and they're made of aluminum, and they bolt together in the back. They have a rib where you bolt them together, and they're even cheaper than the Amazon price that he paid. I've seen prices down to $65. They sell them mainly, I think, for use in developing countries for cooking. And, you know, I see on the internet, there are pictures of them lined up in Africa where people are cooking their meals on there rather than having to forage for firewood and then uh, have respiratory problems from firewood uh, cooking in their abodes and spending all their time collecting firewood and so on. So the solar cookers were mainly, I think, for to solve that problem of if you have sunny conditions like in Africa, you can cook your meals on these things. But hey, if you want to attach a feed horn to it, you can work EME with these things, and people are making now on 1296. Everything is commercially available. You could buy a feed from somebody. You can buy an amplifier online. You can buy the preamplifiers and everything online. So commercially, all this stuff is available. And with a system like this and a couple 100 watts, you can work similar sized stations on CW, or certainly on with the digital modes, but even on CW, you can make contacts on 1296 that way. So as I said before, in 2002, this new digital mode program came out, and it revolutionized weak signal work. There was no possibility of doing a 6-meter EME de-expedition until these programs came out. The first 6-meter EME contacts were made on CW between two stations that were each running a kilowatt, and they each were running 8 Yagis, and they each were having ground gain at the same time. One was in Oklahoma, one was in Texas. They were both beaming at moonrise, so they both had ground gain at the same time, and they finally eked out a contact on CW. So, you know, it required a lot. But now, all of a sudden, with this innovation with the digital modes, single Yagi stations can work single Yagi stations. So it's a whole new game on 6-meter EME now. So here are some quick photos of some of the places I've activated so far for the first time on 6-meter EME. My first one was to go to Rarotonga in the South Cook Islands. And I went there with my friend Bob, ZL1RS, who was operating 2-meter EME at the same time I was operating 6 meters. And then the following year we went to Fiji, and you can see this is my antenna. It was specially designed by M Squared for me to operate portable use. It was called the 6M8GJ, and very lightweight, very high gain. And I did manual elevation with that. I made a little elevation mount for it, and I just steered it with ropes. You can see the guideline ropes out here to aim it up at the moon. And after that, I went out to Samoa, which used to be Western Samoa, but it's Samoa. And I set up on this lava outcrop here. I still have the scar on my ankle to show that it's tough out there to keep your footing when you go out in the middle of the night in the dark to move your antenna. And after that, we went to Niue, which is a few hours by plane from New Zealand. And we didn't have a very good shot. You can see this was a picture of the place. The shot to the east was not good, so I had to use elevation most of the time, except on my moonset. And here's a picture. Boy, every moonset we just waited to hear because I had signals down to minus 1.5 degrees after the moon had already gotten down past zero. Because if you're beaming out over the ocean, there's curvature of the earth as long as there's no land on the horizon, and you've got a negative horizon. And it was just amazing to have the signals pop up out of the noise when the moon got down to 0 degrees. And in the QSL card, you can see my wife snorkeling there in the pools around Niue. Then I went on my first and only de-expedition with HFers to Clipperton Island, and that was a pretty good success considering. I didn't get that much moon time because they put a limit on use of the gasoline. So I couldn't run my amplifier for a couple days in the middle of the week. So I was shut down, but I did set up about a kilometer down the beach from everybody on HF, so they didn't interfere with me, and I didn't interfere with them. And I worked 50 stations on 6-meter EME, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to HFD expeditions, but it sure did make a lot of people around the world happy to get a new rare one. And I finally got that Clipperton myself last year when some people went down there. You can see all the birds that that are down there. You had to walk carefully when you went out to aim the antenna that you didn't step on any boobies or booby eggs. The following year, set up on American Samoa at a an atmospheric weather station on a peninsula at the northeast corner of American Samoa. I couldn't believe it. I had been looking at American Samoa for a number of years, and I couldn't figure out any place to set up until I finally got this referral from their Forest Service people. Well, why don't you contact the NOAA observatory in the northeast corner on this little peninsula? And I made a big submitted a big application to them, and they said, yeah, we've never had anybody do Moonbounce from here. Sure, you can come. So I set up there in their yard. It was great. It was a promontory 200 feet down to the ocean on both moonrise and moonset. And I made my first de-expedition to Yap. I set up on Falalap Island in Ulithi Atoll. And my amplifier blew up after one moon pass. So I took all my gear out and set it on the beach, and a passing merchant ship saw that that's the sign, and they came out and picked me up, and I went back to Yap to do it better the next year. And the next year I went to Palau. And let's see. No, you're not here. Are you hearing any audio from this? I'm not hearing any audio on my end.
No.
We
No.
can see trees moving, and we're very familiar with wind here.
Yeah. Well, I set up, this is how I set up the antenna. And the outskirts of a hurricane over the Philippines happened to be hitting us, but I try to set it up so that the wind helps me raise the antenna. And there was plenty of wind that day. So it came right up.
Hmm.
And that's the system that I use on all the DXpeditions for raising the antenna.
Wow.
And then the following year, I went back to Fallalop Island again. I had to get the approval of all of the island chiefs, and they weren't allowing any tourists to go there. But I did go back, and I was able to set up. This is the building that was still leaking and from all the cyclone damage. But I found kind of a dryish corner of the room, and I set everything up in the corner of the room, and that operation worked out fine, and I worked all the people that I had hoped to work that I missed the first time around. And then we went, my wife and I went to Cocos Keeling Islands off the west coast of Perth, Australia, and that was an interesting spot. But here you can see my wife with a booby on her head. Um, some people had raised this little booby, which was abandoned from when it was a chick, and it was almost full grown here, but it still was gray color. It didn't have its white feathers yet, and it didn't know how to fly yet. So my wife would throw it hard, and it would go for about 20 feet flapping, learning how to flap, and then it would land, and then it would walk back and be thrown again. It was pretty neat. Uh, there were lots of green turtles there in the lagoon, and it was an interesting trip. And then from there, to make a long story, which is really long, short, we finally got to Christmas Island, which is famous for its crab migration. And we were there during the beginning of the crab migration. And these red crabs go by the millions down to the sea. And they have special animal underpasses for them that look like cattle guards. And they use sheet metal to funnel them to the cattle guards so that the crabs will walk under the roads without being hit. Anyway, that was also a successful 6-meter DXpedition. And then after that, Karen said, well, I don't know if I'm ready to go on another one of these things quite yet, because that last one was six weeks. And so I said, okay, well, if I'm going by myself, I'll go someplace really horrible that you wouldn't want to come anyway, because nobody wants to go there. So I decided to go to Nauru, which is a pretty rare country. And it was quite difficult to get a visa and to figure out how to get there and so on. But I finally did get there. And that was a very successful trip. And the following trip was down into Bolivia, on the shores of Lake Titicaca at 12,000 feet. And that was an interesting trip too, for lots of reasons. Here in the lower right-hand corner, you can see the highway ends at one point, and you just continue on little motorboat barges across the river to the little village on the other side, and the road picks up again to get to our place on Lake Titicaca. It was quite an experience. And the following year, we went to the Seychelles, which were needed by everybody in North America and by quite a few people in Europe. And following year, I went to the Austral Islands, went to Rimataro, which is this little tiny island about 1.5 miles in diameter. And I was overlooking the airport off the north side of the island. So I had a good, it was very quiet. And I did see on my last day there, I saw one of these rare uh, parrots that they have on that island, which they're trying to, they're endangered, so, and they're extinct from the nearby Cook Islands. So they're trying to repopulate the Cook Islands with these, they're called lorikeets. And then after that, I went up to the Marquesas Islands in French Polynesia, up in the north end of French Polynesia, and the home of Paul Gauguin, and who was a famous French artist. And here are a picture of some of the sacrificial places that they had on the island back in the cannibalism days. The following year we went to activate Mayotte, which is shown here in the map, and it's just between Madagascar and mainland Africa. It was our first experience with lemurs. There they go. And then the next year we went to Rodrigues Island, which was further east. And it's starting to get to be, moonset for most people in North America and moonrise for me. So it was a real long stretch for most people. But I did have a good shot out over the ocean, so that's important at a time like that. And I had lots of helpers putting the antenna up on the mast. This little dog kept running around when I was taking the antenna apart, and it made me fall on the rocks because it tripped me up. Usually I'd have to do this by myself, so it was nice to have all these helpers. The problem is that the helpers are pushing the antenna one way and I'm trying to push it another way. And then last year I decided to go to another rare place that was needed by everybody in North America on 6 meters. It was Tristan da Cunha in the middle of the South Atlantic. It's a volcano, and there are about 240 people that live there year round. And as my wife reminds me, I was there for 73 days because of trouble getting ships in and out of there in the high seas. And then last month, I went to Tuamotu province in the Eastern Solomon Islands, and I operated from Pigeon Island, which is a little 6-acre island in the Reef Islands of Tuamotu province. And I worked 150 6-meter stations on 6-meter EME. I should add that I worked 173 from Tristan da Cunha, but I was there for longer. So, and my amplifier died on me here on this most recent trip after after almost 8 moon passes. So it was frustrating to lose a couple days left of moon time, but it was great to have made so many souls happy. And this is the array here in Frenchtown. You can see I've got 4 Yagis on 6 meters plus a single Yagi up at 70 feet for 6 meters, and then 16 Yagis for 2 meters. So does anybody have any questions about EME or why in the world you'd be stupid enough to try it?
Yes, when you travel, how do you bring all this equipment with you?
Well, it's heavy, but I can I have 4 50-pound suitcases, plus a carry-on with the amplifier and a laptop computer. And so far I've been pretty lucky. All of the gear has arrived with me everywhere I've gone. The gear didn't make it with me on the way home from the last one. It loved Australia so much that it wanted to stay there a few more days, even though I made the connection to get home. But you know, I'm a firm believer in paying the excess baggage fees for all the gear, and then trying to take it with you. I've heard too many horror stories about HF people doing de-expeditions and shipping the stuff on ahead and then finding out that it didn't arrive there, or it was stuck in customs, or whatever. So everything I have is pretty lightweight and compact. My little exciter puts out up to 5 watts, and I had been using it just to do 2 watts. It's a little SDR transmitter. The amplifier required 2 watts for 1500 watts output. So, and I use an SDR receiver. I use an AirSpy R2, which is the size of a pack of cigarettes. So that's pretty small and effective. So the biggest and heaviest thing I take is the LMR 600 coax. And some of these places I've been able to get by with just a 50-foot piece. So I use the 50-foot piece of LMR 600 Ultraflex from the antenna and around the top of the mast. And that comes out to about 15 feet from the mast. And then when I need to, I take another piece of 25-foot long LMR 600, and that's the combination of the two of those is what I was able to use from H40 last month. So I had 75 feet of feed line. It's really important to have low loss feed line on EME. So anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Charlotte, you actually can't get permission to go.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Let me put on my headphones.
I'll relay. She said, is there any place that you have not been able to get permission to go?
Not so far. I mean, some of the times it's difficult to get permission and it takes a little bit longer. Often I try to start the licensing and the logistics of trying to get there a year in advance. In the case of Tristan da Cunha, I tried for several years in advance to get there because there's so few available berths on ships to get there, and you have to get special dispensation from the island council, and they have in their case they have 7 classes of people who would get a berth on one of the few berths that are available on cargo ships that stop at Tristan da Cunha, and a visitor like me is in the 7th group behind all these other classes of people. You know, you have the locals who have to go for medical reasons back to South Africa. You know, the relatives of locals who are coming to visit, the dignitaries from the UK who are coming there on official business, the the contractors that they're hiring to come work and repair things on the island, you know, and so pretty soon, I mean, so many times, you know, I'd get an email and say, well, you know, there's no room for you this year. In fact, in 2023, when I went, finally, I had hoped to go over in the middle of September on one of their fishing boats, which had like 5 berths available. And I got an email in August, and I was told, no, I'm sorry, you know, berths are all taken by higher priority passengers. However, there's one opening on the annual Antarctic or the annual ship that the South African icebreaker, when they come over in September. And there are 40 berths available on that, and one berth just opened up. And so if you can be down here by September 5th, you can take that berth. And I said, my bags are already packed, and I'll get on the phone as soon as tonight and make last minute flight reservations down to Cape Town, South Africa. So that's what I did, and I was thrilled to be able to go over on the Agulhas too, which is a great big huge icebreaker, very smooth sailing, and then I came back on a lobster fishing boat, but but you know, you just you have to do what you have to do. So, but in answer to your question, no, I've always been able to get licensing for the places I've gone so far. Now there have been some places that are still on the list that, you know, like ZD8, which is Ascension Island, which is it's tough to even get a visa to go there because it's just basically a military base. But I haven't really gone through all that yet. It's not come to the top of the list yet, so I think I could do that one too. It just takes a little bit more work.
Well, hey,
One other question, who made your amplifier? Did you make it yourself?
I bought it from DX Shop in the UK, and they make VHF amplifiers there at the DX Shop, and I contacted them and said, you know, what I really need. Before that, I used an amplifier made by M Squared. But it was bigger, and I told the people at the DX Shop, here's what I need for an amplifier. I need something that I can carry in a carry-on. It's got to weigh less than 15 pounds. I want it to give me 1,500 watts, which was about, you know, the M Squared amplifier, which they don't make anymore, gave me almost 1,000. But that extra couple dB really is necessary when you're right on the borderline anyway. So I wanted one that would give me 1,500 watts, that would not require 100-watt drive the way the M Squared did. See, so now I don't have to carry a power supply to run the driver amplifier. And so they designed this little amplifier and made it for me. It only required 2 watts of drive, and it provided its 4 amps, 12 volt output too, so that it could provide enough voltage to run my little SDR transmitter and my receiver. So I didn't need a separate another 12-volt power supply to take along, which was great. All I had to do is take along the power supply for the 57 volts that it took to run it. So, I mean, it was just a great little amplifier. So I sent it back when I got back from the trip here recently. I sent it back to be repaired by them. And it got returned 2 weeks later because it never made it out of the United States because of some customs form problem or something. So the post office fixed that for me, and they said, okay, we'll send it off again. And I see on the tracking it's going to be delivered back to me again tomorrow. So I don't know what the problem is with the postal service right now, but I'll find some way to get it back to England in time for the next trip.
That's interesting that you had no problem taking it in your carry-on. but
Yeah.
Mail it, so.
Yeah, I have a a small little carry-on suitcase that meets all the requirements for overhead carry-on.
Yeah,
But as it turned out, as it turned out, the plane that I wound up taking to Pigeon Island was something called a Twin Otter. There were no carry-on places above the seats, and the walkway between the seats was about 6 inches wide. And I've got a great picture looking back of the people and the co-pilot trying to make his way through the people to get up to the cabin and to the cockpit. And it's just, luckily there was nobody sitting next to me, and I could just have my carry-on in the seat. But that was another story too, because the Solomon Airlines repeatedly canceled my reservations for the first flight. So I lost the first week out of 3 weeks on that DXpedition, just waiting for the next Solomon Airlines flight where they really would fly. But there are always things like that. There are always little glitches and tests of how you make things work. When the amplifier stopped working after 8 moon passes, I was pretty much done then anyway, and there's no way I could repair it on the island. But there's some things, like when I was in Rimatara in French Polynesia, the first time I put up the antenna, I had a French helper who we had a little bit of a communication problem. And as I pulled the antenna up, he kept pushing it over, and he pulled out the guy stake on the other end of the mast guy line, and the antenna came down over my head and crashed into the ground and broke a couple elements. And I lost a half a day there because I had to spend time finding an aluminum can by the side of the road and cutting it out with tin shears and making a splice with a nail that I had, and wrapping it up and putting the broken pieces of the antenna element together, and wrapping it all up and splicing it and getting it up again. And that worked for that part of the trip. But
well,
I actually got a replacement element in Tahiti on my way to the Marquesas, which I couldn't even believe. But anyway, it's always something.
well, Lance, I think we're gonna end it there with antenna first aid.
Okay. Thanks for bearing with me on this whole thing, and it's been great sharing this bizarre aspect of the hobby with you. And good luck, and hope to see you on EME.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks again, Lance. I appreciate you staying up late and joining us for the meeting tonight, so.
Thank you, bud.
Thank you so much.
73.
All right, go on.
Yeah, I guess we'll take it.